Hello and welcome to Spaceflight Histories, a channel dedicated to telling the history of space exploration. Today, we're looking at 5 fun facts about Gemini 4, the second manned flight of the Gemini program and the first American extravehicular activity, or EVA. The mission's command pilot was James McDivitt, and its pilot was Ed White, both Air Force pilots and rookies from NASA's second class of astronauts, the New 9. The crew's backup astronauts were Frank Borman and Jim Lovell, also from the New 9, and the future prime crew of Gemini 7. Let's look at 5 interesting facts about Gemini 4. 1. Gemini 4's capsule would have been named American Eagle. 5 years before Apollo 11 was preparing to land men on the moon for the first time, astronauts McDivitt and White chose the bald eagle to represent their Gemini 4 mission. The bald eagle is a species native to North America and is the national bird and national symbol of the United States, representing courage, freedom, and strength. Some even call Merritt Island, the location of the Kennedy Space Center, their home. While Gemini 4 and Apollo 11 used the bald eagle, 2 earlier manned Soviet missions used the golden eagle, or Berkut, which lives throughout the Northern Hemisphere. Berkut was the sign of Pavel Popovich's Vostok 4 spacecraft in 1962, and the name of Alexei Leonov's Voskhod 2 EVA suit. Oriol, or Eagle, was also the call sign for Herman Titov's Vostok 2 spacecraft in 1961. McDivitt and White chose the name American Eagle for their spacecraft. However, after Gemini 3 concluded in March 1965, NASA stopped allowing its astronauts to name their spacecraft, a military tradition carried over by the Mercury 7 astronauts. Unhappy with this new rule, the duo had a patch of the American flag sewn onto their spacesuits, becoming the very first of hundreds of space travelers around the world to wear their home country's flag into space. Prior Mercury and Gemini astronauts wore only a name tape and the NASA meatball on their spacesuits. Soviet cosmonauts wore the Cyrillic abbreviation of USSR on their spacesuit helmets, and Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, wore a patch of a dove clutching an olive branch on her thermal garment under her spacesuit during her 1963 Vostok 6 flight. Though Gemini 5 was the first crew to wear embroidered, personalized mission patches on their spacesuits, the crews of Gemini 3 and Gemini 4 designed their own insignia. McDivitt and White carried silver medallions with artwork of a bald eagle perched atop a Gemini spacecraft with 5 stars in the background. The inclusion of the crew's first and last names and middle initials is unique to Gemini 3's and Gemini 4's insignia. 2. Gemini 4 was the first internationally televised rocket launch. Gemini 4 lifted off from Launch Complex 19 on Cape Kennedy Air Force Station on Thursday, June 3, 1965 at 10:16 a.m. local time. While it was not the first manned launch from Pad 19 nor the first manned launch of the Gemini Titan II rocket, it was the first internationally televised rocket launch. Though the Soviet Union put the first artificial object and the first living creature into orbit at the start of the space race, the U.S. dominated the development and deployment of communication satellites for years, beginning in December 1958 with SCORE, or Signal Communications by Orbital Relay Equipment, the world's first communication satellite. Intelsat-1, nicknamed Early Bird, was the first commercial geosynchronous communications satellite and entered orbit in April 1965. 12 European nations received coverage of Gemini 4's launch. Early Bird also provided the first live coverage of a spacecraft splashdown, that of Gemini 6A in December 1965, and supported the broadcasting of Apollo 11's flight to international audiences. And its greatest contribution was to the 1967 TV program Our World, the first live, multinational, and multi-satellite broadcast. 3. Gemini 4 was the first mission controlled in Texas rather than Florida. Prior Mercury and Gemini missions were controlled by the Mercury Control Center on Cape Kennedy, and as missions got more complex, it was evident a larger facility was needed. The Mission Control Center at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas, now the Johnson Space Center, became operational in mid-1965 and has managed flight operations for every crewed NASA mission since. Mission Operations Control Room 2, which controlled all Gemini flights other than Gemini 3, and all Apollo Saturn V flights, was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1985 and was retired in 1992 after the conclusion of the STS-53 Discovery mission. It was later converted to its Apollo-era configuration for the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 and can be toured via Space Center Houston. In April 2011, the Mission Control Center was renamed to the Christopher C. Kraft Jr. Mission Control Center after NASA's first flight director, Chris Kraft. Kraft also served as Johnson Space Center Director from 1972 to 1982. The Mercury Control Center was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1984 and was a stop for tourists visiting the Cape until the 1990s. In May 2010, the building, full of asbestos and in poor condition, had to be demolished. A historical marker was erected in 2011, and the control room consoles were rescued and refurbished. Since 1999, a recreation of the Mercury Control Center can be viewed at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. Gus Grissom, veteran of Mercury, Redstone 4, and Gemini 3, and rookie astronauts Gene Cernan and Roger Chaffee served as capsule communicators for Gemini 4. 4. Ed White performed the first American spacewalk. About 4.5 hours into the mission, White was ready to fulfill Gemini 4's secondary objective: perform the first American EVA. He began his spacewalk, as it would be colloquially called, while over Hawaii by sticking his feet out of his open hatch and drifting up and out of the cockpit. Tied to a tether, White floated around the outside of his McDivitt's capsule, took photos, and maneuvered using the handheld maneuvering unit, a pressurized oxygen jet gun informally called the zip gun, losing a thermal glove in the process and exclaiming to Mission Control,
"I feel like $1 million."
The zip gun is now on display at the Apollo Saturn V Center at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex. White was reluctant to come back in, but the astronauts were approaching the solar terminator and would soon be enveloped in complete darkness, as well as be out of communication with the Bermuda tracking station. He ended his EVA after 23 minutes, 10 minutes longer than it had been planned, and let Mission Control know White's EVA was NASA's response to the Soviets' EVA performed a few months prior, but was conceived almost a year earlier. On March 18, 1965, Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov became the first person to walk in space during Voskhod 2, while the final go to perform the first American EVA was not given until the week before liftoff. The possibility of some sort of EVA taking place during Gemini 4 actually dates back to July 1964. At the press conference where the prime and backup crews were announced to the public, Gemini Deputy Manager Kenneth Kleinneck mentioned the possibility of having an astronaut open the hatch and stick his head out while in space. The NASA history publication On the Shoulders of Titans, A History of Project Gemini, states Gemini 4, quote, first appeared as the program's lead-off EVA mission in a program plan for Gemini extravehicular operation during January 1964, unquote. According to this book, a few reporters called the spacecraft Little Eva, in reference to the mission's EVA. Little Eva was a singer from the 1960s, best known for her 1962 hit The Locomotion, though Little Eva is also the name of a U.S. Army Air Force's B-24 Liberator that crashed in Australia in 1942. Do with that what you will. The Soviet achievement urged the Manned Spacecraft Center to add an EVA to Gemini 4's objectives, and on May 25, 1965, White's attempt to walk in space was approved. 5. Gemini 4 set an American manned spaceflight duration record. With the first American EVA complete, Gemini 4 now focused on carrying out its prime mission objective of evaluating work procedures, schedules, and flight plans for astronauts spending an extended period of time in space, setting a new manned space endurance record for the U.S. in the process. The longest manned American flight up to this point was Gordon Cooper's Mercury Atlas 9 mission in 1963. With a duration of 34 hours and 19 minutes, it was the first manned American spaceflight to exceed 1 day in length. Mercury Atlas 6 and Mercury Atlas 7 had nearly identical flight durations of 4 hours and 55 minutes and 4 hours and 56 minutes, respectively. Mercury Atlas 8 lasted 9 hours and 13 minutes, and Gemini 3 lasted just under 5 hours. Gemini 4 would spend 4 days in orbit. Gemini 4 attempted a rendezvous with the empty Titan second stage during their first orbit, but depleted fuel, a lack of a tracking radar, and other challenges resulted in mission control calling off the station-keeping exercise. 11 experiments were performed by McDivitt and White, including measuring radiation surrounding the spacecraft, using a bungee cord for exercise, and using a sextant for spacecraft navigation to determine its feasibility for use during future Apollo missions. During the 48th of 62 orbits, the onboard computer malfunctioned and later crashed, so Gemini 4 could not perform their planned computer-controlled reentry. On June 7th, during orbit 62 and after nearly 98 hours in space, the spacecraft performed a zero-lift ballistic reentry, similar to the reentry of Mercury capsules, and splashed down 450 miles east of Cape Kennedy in the West Atlantic Ocean. The capsule is now in the possession of the National Air and Space Museum. Honorable mention: Gemini 4 was recovered by the USS Wasp. Gemini 4 was the first of multiple manned spacecraft to be recovered by the USS Wasp. Wasp was an Essex-class aircraft carrier built during World War II and the 10th of 11 Continental and U.S. Navy ships to bear the name. She received 8 battle stars for her participation in several campaigns in the Pacific Theater, including the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the Battle of Iwo Jima, and provided air support during the Battle of Guam. After the war, she was modernized and served in the Atlantic, Caribbean, and Mediterranean. Wasp was the recovery ship for 5 Gemini missions, half of the program's manned flights. Gemini 4 in 1965, the dual Gemini 6A and Gemini 7 in December 1965, Gemini 9A in June 1966, and Gemini 12 in November 1966 were all plucked out of the ocean by the USS Wasp and her crew. The ship was also a backup recovery vessel for Gordon Cooper and his Mercury Atlas 9 Faith 7 capsule in 1963, but they were retrieved by the USS Kearsarge. Wasp was decommissioned in 1972 and sold for scrap in 1973. McDivitt and White were welcomed home with a ticker tape parade in Chicago, Illinois, and were visited by President Lyndon B. Johnson in Houston. They attended the Paris International Air Show later in June and met Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space. The songs Gemini, Him and I, Flying in the Gemini by the New Christie Minstrels from 1965 and The Walk of Ed White by Up With People from 1969 tell the story of Gemini 4's flight and White's EVA. In spring 1966, McDivitt and White were transferred to the Apollo program. White served as backup command pilot for Gemini 7 in 1965 before being assigned as senior pilot of the first manned Apollo mission, AS-204. Gemini 4's Capcoms, Gus Grissom and Roger Chaffee, were assigned as commander and pilot. McDivitt was assigned as the mission's backup commander, but his crew was replaced by Wally Schirra's crew in December. McDivitt's crew was named the prime crew of a new mission that aimed to fly both the Apollo Command and Service Module and the Lunar Module. The astronauts of AS-204, posthumously officially renamed Apollo 1, were killed when their spacecraft's cockpit caught fire on the launch pad on January 27, 1967. White was 36 years old and left behind a wife, a son, and a daughter. Jim McDivitt, Dave Scott, and Rusty Schweikart flew Apollo 9, the third manned Apollo mission, in March 1969 and evaluated the lunar module's performance in low Earth orbit. From May to August of that year, McDivitt served as the manager of lunar landing operations, and in August 1969 was named manager of the Apollo spacecraft program. He oversaw Apollos 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, and was promoted to brigadier general in 1972. He retired from both NASA and the Air Force in July 1972 and worked in industry until 1995. And he and White were inducted into the International Space Hall of Fame in 1982 and the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame in 1993. James McDivitt passed away on October 13, 2022 at the age of 93. Gemini 4 approached but did not surpass the 5-day-long Soviet Vostok 5 mission, but proved to the world American astronauts were capable of not only working, but walking in space. Gemini 5 would attempt to double Gemini 4's time spent in space and break the world record for longest manned space mission. Thanks for watching, and I hope you learned something new today. As always, my sources can be found in my Gemini 4 web article linked in the description, and if you want more space history, hit subscribe and I'll see you next time. I've been Erin, and this has been Spaceflight Histories.